From NPR News, this is live special coverage of President Biden's first press conference. I'm Tanya Mosley.
I'm Callum Borchers.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. In just a few minutes, President Biden is going to be taking questions from reporters at the White House. We are bringing it to you live, and we have a number of NPR correspondents and analysts listening along with us. I want to introduce NPR White House correspondent Franco Ordonez, national political correspondent Mara Liasson, diplomacy correspondent Michelle Kellerman, and NPR health policy reporter Selena Simmons-Duffin. So happy you are all here with us today.
Happy to be here.
As we wait for the president to start, I want to begin with NPR's Franco Ordonez. And before we get to the topics that are likely to be covered, let's talk about the significance of the event itself. No president in decades has gone this long without a formal press conference. Even though Biden has regularly taken questions from the media off the cuff, why is an event like this important?
Well, it's a very important event because this is an event that, as you note, it has been decades. I mean, our colleague Tamara Keith looked back at the records and found that it was all the way back to President Truman that a president hadn't given a press conference this early. This is about transparency. This is about speaking to the public. And this is an important step that the American people want to hear from the president directly, and they want to know that he's answering the questions that they have and the questions that reporters have.
We're going to drill down on what some of those specific questions might be, but give us the big picture. I mean, what are the headlines likely to be that he's undoubtedly going to be asked about?
So undoubtedly, he's going to be asked about gun control. There have been 2 mass shootings in a week. What's he going to do about those? Immigration is another big one, particularly the number of unaccompanied children and teenagers who are being held at border facilities. And of course, the pandemic. He's been out touting his big relief package, but there's still a lot of concern about variants that are spreading across the country.
Mara Liasson, this is Callum Borchers. Let me come to you. The president
Callum.
came in with a jam-packed agenda, and then all of a sudden we have a couple of mass shootings in Atlanta first and then in Boulder, Colorado. How has that affected the White House agenda?
Well, he always wanted to pass an assault weapons ban and universal background checks. I think this has just given it more urgency. I don't know if it's made it more easy to pass that kind of legislation in the Senate. There is a bipartisan bill, Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin, for background checks. They wouldn't be completely universal, only for commercial sales, not private sales. But it just makes gun safety more in the forefront. I don't think it changed Biden's agenda. As you said, he has a jam-packed agenda. I can't think of a president who came into office with a more ambitious to-do list and a smaller majority in Congress. I mean,
How does he manage
extremely
to
narrow. Well, that is the question. He does it, number one, by keeping every single Democrat on board and unified. He can't afford a single defection in the Senate. Some of the things he can pass with 51 votes if they are deemed eligible by the Senate parliamentarian for budget reconciliation. That's a Senate rule. It actually was a carve out to the filibuster that says if it's about fiscal policy, you only need 51 votes, not 60. And for the other stuff that isn't going to be able to go on a reconciliation bill, he would have to get 10 Republican senators or do away with the filibuster. And there's a humongous debate about that right now.
The coronavirus is also undoubtedly going to come up, and I want to talk to NPR Selena Simmons-Duffin about that. Selena, Biden set this seemingly ambitious goal of 100 million vaccination shots in 100 days. The U.S. met the goal on day 58. So bring us up to speed on how the vaccination campaign is going.
Well, the vaccination campaign seems to be going really well. And I have to admit that he complains that the media really said that was an overly ambitious goal, and that the Trump administration set several goals related to the pandemic response that were not met and really kind of, I think, affected people's mood. And so, yes, I think that on the reverse side, meeting this goal early is a boon to people's sense that this is really going to happen and we are going to get through the pandemic. But I would say that right now, the pandemic is kind of in a precarious place. The downward trend in cases has plateaued a bit. There are still 55,000 new cases every single day and around 1,000 deaths. So it's better than it was during the peak. But I think that the public health officials that we hear from frequently have been saying that vigilance needs to remain, even as the vaccination campaign does seem to be continuing at a rapid clip. And I think that these new surges that are starting to show up in Michigan and New Jersey and some other places give credence to that advice that, a public health response needs to happen on a number of different fronts, including vaccinations.
Also, on the subject of healthcare, the president announced this week that he is extending the window for people to sign up for health insurance on healthcare.gov. He's extending that window another 3 months. He has been promoting the Affordable Care Act, which of course passed when he was vice president under Obama.
Right.
How is that working? How many people are signing up?
Oh, I wish I could tell you that. We only got information on the first 2 weeks that the healthcare.gov was open for the special enrollment period. And I should say that this is the first special enrollment period during the entire pandemic. The Trump administration never allowed people to sign up outside of the open enrollment period that happens in the fall.
And
So
when the
we
open
know that
enrollment
about
period happened, they cut funding for advertising and didn't really tell people about it.
Exactly. So that means that the Biden administration has quite a hefty budget to play with in terms of advertising because the Trump administration left so much on the table. It's around $1 billion. They've promised that they're really going to get the word out there. I don't know that that has started yet. But what we do know about enrollment so far is that about 200,000 people signed up in the first 2 weeks. That started mid-February. And, I think that given the fact that subsidies are sweetened in the big law that just passed, the American Relief Plan, people might be enticed to get covered. There's still, 20 million people who don't have any coverage right now and might be eligible for hefty subsidies. So, we'll have to see when they start releasing information about enrollment, whether boosting enrollment and reducing the number of people who aren't insured in this country is working the way that Biden hopes.
You're listening to special coverage from NPR News. President Biden will be holding his first press conference at the White House today. And I want to go to Michelle Kellerman to talk a little bit about foreign policy issues. And let's start with North Korea, which has just conducted more missile tests. This is a big test for Biden, isn't it?
Yeah, but they've been Biden administration officials are trying to downplay these tests. There were two missiles today. There was some more military activity over the weekend. They're trying to finish up their policy review on North Korea, and their goal is really to work with allies and partners and to get a more united front to deal with this challenge. They've also said that they've been trying to figure out, what went on with the Trump administration. They've been talking with Trump administration officials about their approach to North Korea, which was, you might recall, summit diplomacy. There were two big summits with North Korea. But in the past year, there hasn't been a lot of diplomacy going on. North Korea has rebuffed the initial openings that the Biden administration had. They're starting to do these missile launches. So it is testing them. But what they're trying to do is get on the same page with Japan, South Korea, other big partners to deal with this.
Well, let's talk about that just for a second. I mean, as you said, there's also China and Russia pulling troops out of Afghanistan. What other questions will the president face about foreign policy, do you think, today?
Well, Afghanistan could certainly be a big question. I mean, this administration, like the previous one, talks about ending endless wars, but how do you end this war in Afghanistan? Under the Trump administration's deal with the Taliban, there's a May 1st deadline to pull the remaining troops out. 2,500 troops remain there. The initial signals from the Biden administration are that, maybe they should stay a little longer because the Taliban's not upholding its end of the bargain. There's still a lot of violence in the country. But again, this is a policy that's under review, and they haven't made any firm decisions yet. It was part of the discussions that Secretary of State Tony Blinken had this week at
which is the Build Back Better agenda. That's huge investments in physical infrastructure and human infrastructure, way beyond roads and bridges, the technologies and manufacturing of the future, 5G, a carbon-free electric grid, intellectual property. I think if he takes the opportunity today, he will frame that agenda in terms of outcompeting China. It's a bipartisan message that has a lot of resonance in Republican circles, that he will say the U.S. has failed to invest in itself for a very long time, and as he put it the other day, if we don't reverse that trend, China will, quote, eat our lunch. And that's how he's going to try to sell this infrastructure bill. It's going to be very hard. Not all of it can be passed with 51 votes on reconciliation. The package includes tax increases, which Republicans don't like. A tax increase on individuals making over $400,000. That's a pretty high bar for definition of the wealthy, a lot higher than Democrats in the past have placed it. But he also wants to raise the corporate tax. And it'll be really interesting to see how he takes this opportunity, because it's a big, high-profile event to have a solo press conference at the White House. It's kind of like he waited so long that anticipation is even greater.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see how he takes that.
Put these two big bills in context of his promise of bipartisanship for us, because he obviously passed the coronavirus relief bill without any Republican support.
Well, that is the big question. He campaigned on not just tamping down the partisan dumpster fire and being more civil, but he also campaigned on actually working across the aisle with Republicans. He said he believed that it could happen. It's what he said he experienced in his many, many years in the Senate in the good old days. He is definitely a good old days kind of president. And I think that, the White House tried to redefine his call for unity as saying, well, we have bipartisan support for the COVID relief plan, just not among Republicans in Congress. But look at all these Republican voters. It's very popular with people. Republican mayors and local officials like it. But he is going to have to, I think, make a huge effort to get Republican support for part of this. Don't forget, this isn't one giant bill, the infrastructure agenda. There could be discrete pieces of it, universal broadband, some kind of intellectual property protection, the American chips bill so that America makes its own sophisticated semiconductors. Those things could be broken off and passed with Republican support, even though they're small pieces of the big agenda. But, the question for the White House is, do they feel bipartisanship is something nice to have that Biden would really like because it's in his political DNA? Or is it a political necessity? In other words, did all those Republican swing voters who voted for him do it because they took him seriously and literally when he said he would work across the aisle? How much of a political necessity is it for Biden to get bipartisan votes? We don't know if Republicans are in any mood to help him pass any of this. That's also a big question. Remember, during the COVID relief bill, there was pretty much one big White House meeting with Republicans. The president came up with his $1.9 trillion plan for COVID relief. Republicans came back with a $681 billion plan. It was a huge gap, too big to bridge. But this time, they are trying to talk to Republicans on the ground floor. Nancy Pelosi has told her Democratic committee chairman to work with their Republican ranking members to build the infrastructure legislation. That would be a more old-fashioned approach where you try to work together from the beginning. We don't know if it'll work. And at some point, the president's going to have to decide whether to fish or cut bait, whether he thinks he can get Republican support. If not, he will use reconciliation again and put a lot of this infrastructure measures onto another reconciliation bill that he can muscle through with 51 Democratic votes. He has to pass this thing by the end of the year.
So we are waiting for President Biden to begin his first news conference as president, and we will bring that to you as part of this special coverage from NPR. Franco Ordonez, this news conference is coming a day after Biden officials visited a Texas border facility where migrants are being housed. They took only one TV camera with them, by the way. There are considerably more than that in the East Room of the White House today, although you might not know it if you're taking a look because everybody is so socially distant. But nevertheless, he's going to get questions about that, no doubt. What are he and his administration going to do about what Republicans are calling a crisis?
Yeah, that is going to be a really big issue, and I expect those kind of questions to come very early off. I mean, that visit yesterday was to one of the shelters, the HHS shelters. I imagine some of those questions will be, well, you allowed camera into the HHS shelter, but why not the border facilities? It's the border facilities that have raised the greatest concerns because of those are the facilities that even the administration says are no place for children. The HHS facilities are much more appropriate for children. They have bunk beds, they have video games, ball fields. So he's going to get asked a lot about those things and the influx of migrants on the border. Just that. I mean, we've reported on the record number of unaccompanied children being held in these border facilities, and these are facilities built for adults, essentially built for adult criminals. So he's going to be pressed on whether that is a crisis. He has promised a more humane policy. But he'll be asked if the steps that his administration is taking to enact that more humane policy are actually encouraging more migration, and whether it is sending the wrong message to Central America about whether it is easier or not to come to the United States. He may also be asked about his proposal to legalize 11 million undocumented immigrants. Mara just talked about how difficult it is to get Republican support on so many issues. This is one of those issues, and one of the issues that is most difficult to get Republican support on. They've already spoken out very aggressively against it. So he will possibly get asked about how he intends to build support from Republicans on such a major overhaul that really has escaped so many presidents in the past.
Franco, can you talk a little bit more about the term crisis and why the Biden administration has been hesitant to call it that, even though we've heard lots of great reporting from reporters who are down there at the southern border who says it's completely chaotic. The system is very confusing for migrants who are coming into the country. And what this means politically for the president calling it a crisis versus really this stance of really putting out there that they have it under control.
Yeah, there are so many different issues wrapped up in this. I mean, a lot of this, as you note, is political. It is not wanting to acknowledge, a narrative that Republicans are kind of painting, that this is a crisis, that this is, quote, Biden's crisis, and that his policies are driving it. That is, of course, the Republicans' narrative, trying to pin this on Biden, on his policies, on him coming into office, and trying to change things, such as remain in Mexico policy, no longer removing unaccompanied children as President Trump did. Now, those policies were also very controversial, and there were a lot of questions about abuse and misuse of those policies, and the Biden administration has said very directly that there are moral imperatives that kind of stand above some of these migratory policies, immigration policies. So that is something that they have been confronting. At the same time, another reason they argue, and some advocates and experts argue, say this is a cyclical issue. This happened in 2014 under then President Obama. It happened again in 2019 under then President Trump. Despite his extremely harsh policies, migrants were still coming in rapid, very high numbers. So, there are some questions about whether something cyclical can be, a crisis. But, I mean, you're right. There's no question that this has been a huge challenge, and they are definitely acknowledging that it is challenging, and there's something that's they are grappling with.
We are waiting for President Biden to arrive in the press room for his first press conference since becoming president. We're told that he should arrive in a few moments, and I actually want to talk with you all about the differences in the way that the press room actually looks today, because people are social distancing. But I want to ask you, Franco, before we get to that. I mean, Biden has assigned Vice President Harris to lead diplomatic efforts in Central America.
Please sit down. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Before I take questions, I want to give you a progress report to the nation on where we stand 65 days into office here, on vaccinations and a few other top priorities for the American people. First, on vaccinations. On December 8th, I indicated that I hope to get 100 million shots in people's arms in my first 100 days. We met that goal last week by day 58, 42 days ahead of schedule. Now today I'm setting a second goal, and that is we will, by my 100th day in office, have administered 200 million shots in people's arms. That's right, 200 million shots in 100 days. I know it's ambitious, twice our original goal, but no other country in the world has even come close, not even close to what we are doing. I believe we can do it. And today, we made a historic investment in reaching the hardest hit and the most vulnerable communities, the highest risk communities, as a consequence of the virus, by investing an additional $10 billion in being able to reach them. I also set a goal before I took office of getting a majority of schools in K through 8 fully open in the first 100 days. Now, thanks to the enormous amount of work done by our administration, educators, parents, local, state education officials, and leaders, recent Department of Education survey shows that nearly half of the K through 8 schools are open now full-time, 5 days a week for in-person learning. In the 35 days left to go, we'll meet that goal as well. As of yesterday, more than 100 million payments of $1,400 have gone into people's bank accounts. That's real money in people's pockets, bringing relief instantly almost. And millions more will be getting their money very soon. One final note. Since we passed the American Rescue Plan, we're starting to see new signs of hope in our economy. Since it was passed, a majority of economic forecasters have significantly increased their projections on the economic growth that's going to take place this year. They're now projecting it will exceed 6%, a 6% growth in GDP. And just this morning, we learned that the number of people filing for weekly unemployment insurance fell by nearly 100,000 persons. It's the first time in a year the number has fallen below the pre-pandemic high. So there are still too many Americans out of work, too many families hurting, and they still have a lot of work to do. But I can say to you, the American people, help is here and hope is on the way. Now I'll be happy to take your questions. Zeke, the Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned your progress on COVID-19. I'd like to ask you about some of the other issues facing your presidency. One of the defining challenges you face in the coming months is how to deliver on your promise to Americans on issues like immigration reform, gun control, voting rights, climate change. All of those right now are facing stiff, united opposition from Republicans on Capitol Hill. How far are you willing to go to achieve those promises that you made to the American people?
Well, I'm good. Look, when I took office, I decided that it was a fairly basic, simple proposition, and that is I got elected to solve problems. And the most urgent problem facing the American people, I stated from the outset, was COVID-19 and the economic dislocation for millions and millions of Americans. And so that's why I put all my focus in the beginning. There are a lot of problems, but all my focus on dealing with those particular problems. And the other problems we're talking about, from immigration to guns and the other things you mentioned are long-term problems. They've been around a long time. And what we're going to be able to do, God willing, is now begin one at a time to focus on those as well. And whether it's immigration or guns or a number of other problems that face the country. But the fundamental problem is getting people some peace of mind so they can go to bed at night and not stare at the ceiling wondering whether they lost their health insurance, whether they're going to lose a family member, whether they're going to be in a position where they're going to lose their home because they can't pay their mortgage, or the millions of people are going to get thrown out of their homes because of the inability to pay their rent. So we're going to move on these one at a time, try to do as many simultaneous as we can, but that's the reason why I focused as I have. And here's the deal. I think my Republican colleagues are going to have to determine whether or not we want to work together, or they'll decide that the way in which they want to proceed is to just decide to divide the country, continue the politics of division. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to move forward and take these things as they come.
Just to follow up, Mr. President, can your presidency be a success if you can't make progress on those four challenges: climate change, immigration reform, gun control, voting rights?
Well, I plan on making progress on all of them, but that's going to be for the American people to decide. I think, I doubt whether, maybe you did, maybe others did. I thought, many of you thought there was no possibility of my getting the plan I got passed without any Republican votes. Pretty big deal. Got passed. Growing the economy. People's lives are changing. So let's see what happens. All I know, I've been hired to solve problems, not create division. Okay, how about Yamiche?
Thanks so much, Mr. President. You've said over and over again that immigrants shouldn't come to this country right now. This isn't the time to come. That message is not being received. Instead, the perception of you that got you elected as a moral, decent man is the reason why a lot of immigrants are coming to this country and entrusting you with unaccompanied minors. How do you resolve that tension? And how are you choosing which families can stay and which can go, given the fact that even though with Title 42, there are some families that are staying? And is there a timeline for when we won't be seeing these overcrowded facilities run by CPB when it comes to unaccompanied minors?
Well, look, I guess I should be flattered. People are coming because I'm the nice guy. That's the reason why it's happening. That I'm a decent man, or however it's phrased. That, that's why they're coming, because Biden's a good guy. Truth of the matter is, nothing has changed. As many people came, 28% increase in children to the border in my administration, 31% in the last year in 2019 before the pandemic in the Trump administration. It happens every single solitary year. There is a significant increase in the number of people coming to the border in the winter months of January, February, March. It happens every year. In addition to that, there is and by the way, does anybody suggest that there was a 31% increase under Trump because he was a nice guy and he was doing good things at the border? That's not the reason they're coming. The reason they're coming is that it's the time they can travel with the least likelihood of dying on the way because of the heat in the desert, number one. Number two, they're coming because of the circumstances in country. In country. The way to deal with this problem, and I started to deal with it back when I was a United States Vice President, putting together a bipartisan plan of over $700 million to do with the root causes of why people are leaving. What did Trump do? He eliminated that funding. He didn't use it. He didn't do it. And in addition to that, what he did, he dismantled all the elements that exist to deal with what had been a problem and has been continued to be a problem for a long time. He, in fact, shut down the number of beds available. He did not fund HHS to get the children out of those Border Patrol facilities where they should not be and not supposed to be more than a few days, a little while. But he dismantled all of that. And so what we're doing now is attempting to rebuild the system that can accommodate what is happening today. And I'd like to think it's because I'm a nice guy, but it's not. It's because of what's happened every year. Let me say one other thing on this. If you take a look at the number of people who are coming, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of people coming to the border and crossing are being sent back. Thousands, tens of thousands of people who are over 18 years of age and single people, one at a time coming, have been sent back, sent home. We're sending back the vast majority of the families that are coming. We're trying to work out now with Mexico their willingness to take more of those families back. But that's what's happening. They're not getting across the border. And those who are coming across the border who are unaccompanied children, we're moving rapidly to try to put in place what was dismantled, as I said. For example, of all the children who are coming across the border, over 70% are either 16 or 17 years old. We're not talking about people ripping babies from mother's arms or little 3-year-olds standing on the border. Less than, I think it's 1.5% fall in the category of the very young. So what we're doing is we're providing for the space, again, to be able to get these kids out of the Border Patrol facilities, which no one should be in any longer than 72 hours. And today, I went to, for example, I used all the resources available to me, went to the Defense Department, and the Secretary of Defense has just made available Fort Bliss, 5,000 beds. Be immediately available, 5,000 beds in the Texas border. So we're building back up the capacity that should have been maintained and built upon, that Trump dismantled. It's going to take time. And the other thing we're doing, I might add, am I giving you too long an answer? Because if you don't want the detail. No, but I mean, I don't know how much detail you want about immigration. Maybe I'll stop there and finish.
My follow-up question is, one, if you could talk a little bit about which families, why they're being allowed to stay, what the families that are being allowed to stay, why they're being allowed to stay. In addition to that, when it comes to the filibuster, which is what Zeke was asking about, there's immigration is a big issue, of course, when it related to the filibuster, but there's also Republicans who are passing bill after bill trying to restrict voting rights. Chuck Schumer is calling it an existential threat to democracy. Why not back a filibuster rule that at least gets around issues including voting rights or immigration? Jim Clyburn, someone, of course, who you know very well, has backed the idea of a filibuster rule when it comes to civil rights and voting rights.
Well, look, I'm going to deal with all of those problems. The question is the priorities as they come and land on my plate. Let's go to the first question you asked, the first of the second questions you asked, and that is, what about dealing with families? Why are not some not going back? Because Mexico is refusing to take them back. All of them. We're in negotiations with the president of Mexico. I think we're going to see that change. They should all be going back. All be going back. The only people we're not going to let sitting there on the other side of the Rio Grande by themselves with no help are children. And what we're doing there, and it's an important point to understand. I know you understand it. I don't mean to say it that way. Important point to focus on. The vast majority of people under the age of 18 coming to the United States come with a telephone number on a wristband, or come with a telephone number in their pocket in the United States. A mother, a father, a close relative, a grandmama or grandpa. What was happening before is it's taking literally weeks and weeks and maybe even months before anybody pick up the phone and call to see if there really was someone there. Well, we've set up a system now where within 24 hours there's a phone call made as that child crosses the border. And then a verification system being put in place as of today to determine quickly whether or not that is a trafficker being called or that is actually a mom, a dad, and or a close relative. They're establishing that right off the bat. If it in fact is mom or dad, dad says, to take the extreme case, I got a birth certificate. Then guess what? We're getting that kid directly to that parent immediately. And so that's going to reduce significantly. There's two ways to reduce child populations in circumstances that are not acceptable, like being held at a Border Patrol station. One is to get them to the place where they have a relative and set a date as to when a hearing can be held. The second way to do it is put them in a Health and Human Services facility that we're occupying now, both licensed beds around the country that exist, as well as, for example, federal resources like Fort Bliss, to get them safely in a place where they can be taken care of while their fate is determined. Filibuster. Filibuster. You know, with regard to the filibuster, it existed just when I came to the United States Senate 120 years ago. And that is that it used to be required for the filibuster, and I had a card on this, so I was going to give you the statistics, but you probably know them, that it used to be that from between 1917 and 1971, the filibuster existed. There were a total of 58 motions to break a filibuster that whole time. Last year alone, there were 5 times that many. So it's being abused in a gigantic way. And for example, it used to be you had to stand there and talk and talk and talk and talk until you collapsed. And guess what? People got tired of talking and tired of collapsing. Filibusters broke down and we were able to break the filibuster, get a quorum and vote. So I strongly support moving in that direction, in addition to having an open mind about dealing with certain things that are just elemental to the functioning of our democracy, like the right to vote, like the basic right to vote. We've amended the filibuster in the past. But here's the deal. As you observed, I'm a fairly practical guy. I want to get things done. I want to get them done consistent with what we promised the American people. And in order to do that, in a 50-50 Senate, we've got to get to the place where I get 50 votes so that the Vice President of the United States can break the tie, or I get 51 votes without her. And so I'm going to say something outrageous. I have never been particularly poor at calculating how to get things done in the United States Senate. So the best way to get something done, if it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to, anyway, we're going to get a lot done. And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about. Okay, hang on. Sorry. Oh, Ms. Kim.
Thank you, Mr. President. To follow up on the filibuster, so do you believe it should take 60 votes to end a filibuster on legislation or 51?
If we could end it with 51, we would have no problem. You're going to have to, the existing rule, it's going to be hard to get a parliamentary ruling that allows 50 votes to end the filibuster, the existence of a filibuster. It's not my expertise in what the parliamentary rules and how to get there are, but our preoccupation with the filibuster is totally legitimate. But in the meantime, we got a lot we can do while we're talking about what we're going to do about the filibuster. Let me get here. Okay. Cecilia Vega.
I'd like to circle back to immigration, please. You just listed the reasons that people are coming, talking about in-country problems, saying that it happens every year. You blamed the last administration. Sir, I just got back last night from a reporting trip to the border where I met 9-year-old Josel, who walked here from Honduras by himself, along with another little boy. He had that phone number on him, and we were able to call his family. His mother says that she sent her son to this country because she believes that you are not deporting unaccompanied minors like her son. That's why she sent him alone from Honduras. So, sir, you blame the last administration, but is your messaging in saying that these children are and will be allowed to stay in this country and work their way through this process, encouraging families like Josel's to come?
Well, look, the idea that I'm going to say, which I would never do, that if an unaccompanied child ends up at the border, we're just going to let him starve to death and stay on the other side. No previous administration did that either, except Trump. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. That's why I've asked the Vice President of the United States yesterday to be the lead person on dealing with focusing on the fundamental reasons why people leave Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador in the first place. It's because of earthquakes, floods. It's because of lack of food. It's because of gang violence. It's because of a whole range of things that when I was vice president had the same obligation to deal with unaccompanied children. I was able to get it slowed up significantly by working with the heads of state of those communities to do things like in one of the major cities, the reason people were leaving is they couldn't walk the street because their kids were getting beat up or shot or gang violence. Well, what I was able to do is not give money to the head of state because so many are corrupt, but I was able to say, okay, you need lighting in the streets to change things? I'll put the lighting in. We got a contractor. We got the type of lighting. We paid directly to the contractor, did not go through the government. And violent crime significantly was reduced in that city. Fewer people sought to leave. When this hurricane occurred, the 2 hurricanes, instead of us going down and helping in a major way so that people would not have a reason to want to leave in the first place because they didn't have housing or water or sustenance, we did nothing. We're going to do a lot in our administration. We're going to be spending that $700+ million a year to change the life and circumstances of why people leave in the first place. That mother did not sit around on the kitchen table and say, you know, I got a great idea. Way I'm going to make sure my son gets taken care of is I'm going to put him, how old was he or she?
He's 9. I also met a 10-year-old.
A 9-year-old. I'm going to send him on a 1,000-mile journey across the desert and up to the United States because I know Joe Biden's a nice guy and he'll take care of him. What a desperate act to have to take. The circumstances must be horrible. So we can do something about that. That's what the vice president's going to be doing. What I did when President Obama asked me to come and deal. I was in Turkey at the time. He said, you got to come home and take care of this. So we put together a plan and it had an impact. And so the question here is how we go ahead and do this, what we do. There's no easy answer.
Quick follow, if I may. Do you want to see these unaccompanied minors staying in this country, or should they be deported eventually?
Well, the judgment has to be made whether or not, in this young man's case, he has a mom at home. There's an overwhelming reason why he'd be put in a plane and flown back to his mom.
Follow, sir. You mentioned circumstances that must be horrific. The Customs and Border Protection Facility in Donna, Texas, I was there, is at 1,556% capacity right now with mostly unaccompanied minors. There are kids that are sleeping on floors. They are packed into these pods. I've spoken to lawyers who say that some of these children have not seen the sun in days. What's your reaction? What is your reaction to these images that have come out from that particular facility? Is what's happening inside acceptable to you? And when is this going to be fixed?
That's a serious question, right? It's acceptable to me. Come on. That's why we're going to be moving 1,000 of those kids out quickly. That's why I got Fort Bliss opened up. That's why I've been working from the moment this started to happen to try to find additional access for children to be able to safely, not just children, but particularly children, to be able to safely be housed while we follow through on the rest of what's happening. That is totally unacceptable. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about Afghanistan. You face a May 1st deadline for the withdrawal of U.S. troops from that country. As a candidate in foreign affairs, you wrote that it is past time to end these forever wars. Can you commit to the American people that by May 2nd, the U.S. will no longer have forces in Afghanistan?
The answer is that it's going to be hard to meet the May 1 deadline. Just in terms of tactical reasons, it's hard to get those troops out. So what we've been doing, what I've been doing, and what Secretary Blinken has been doing, we've been meeting with our allies, those other nations that have NATO allies who have troops in Afghanistan as well. And if we leave, we're going to do so in a safe and orderly way. We're in consultation, I said, with our allies and partners and how to proceed. And Secretary Blinken is meeting in Brussels this week with our NATO allies, particularly those who have forces there. And General Austin is just met with Kayani, and I'm waiting for the briefing on that. He is the leader, quote, in Afghanistan and Kabul. And there's a UN-led process that's beginning shortly on how to mechanically get people, how to end this war. But it is not my intention to stay there for a long time. But the question is, how and in what circumstances do we meet that agreement that was made by President Trump to leave under a deal that looks like it's not being able to be worked out to begin with? How's that done? But we are not staying a long time.
You just said if we leave. Do you think it's possible that
we will leave? The question is when we leave.
Do you believe, though, it's possible we could have troops there next year?
I can't picture that being the case. Okay, Kristen.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Given the conditions that were just laid out at the migrant facilities at the U.S. border, will you commit to allowing journalists to have access to the facilities that are overcrowded moving forward?
I will commit when my plan very shortly is underway to let you have access to not just them, but to other facilities as well.
How soon will journalists be able to have access to the facilities? We've obviously been allowed to be inside one, but we haven't seen the facilities in which children are packed together to really give the American people a chance to see that. Will you commit to transparency on this issue?
I will commit to transparency. And as soon as I am in a position to be able to implement what we're doing right now, and one of the reasons I haven't gone down, all my chief folks have gone down, is I don't want to become the issue. I don't want to be, bringing all the Secret Service and everybody with me to get in the way. So this is being set up, and you'll have full access to everything once we get this thing moving.
Okay, just to be clear, how soon will that be, Mr. President?
I don't know, to be clear.
Okay, and do you bear responsibility for everything that's happening at the border now? I hear you talking a lot about the past administration. You decided to roll back some of those policies. Did you move too quickly to
roll back what? I'm sorry?
Policies. Did you move too quickly to roll back some of the executive orders of your predecessor?
First of all the policies that are underway were not helping at all. Did not slow up the amount of immigration and as many people coming. And rolling back the policies of separating children from their mothers. I make no apology for that. Rolling back the policies of remain in Mexico, sitting on the edge of the Rio Grande in a muddy circumstance with not enough to eat. I make no apologies for that. I make no apologies for ending programs that did not exist before Trump became president, that have an incredibly negative impact on the law, international law, as well as on human dignity. And so I make no apologies for that.
To ask you about foreign policy, Mr. President. Overnight, we learned that North Korea tested 2 ballistic missiles. What, if any, actions will you take, and what is your red line on North Korea?
Let me say that, number one, UN Resolution 1718 was violated by those particular missiles that were tested, number one. We're consulting with our allies and partners, and there will be responses if they choose to escalate. We will respond accordingly. But I'm also prepared for some form of diplomacy, but it has to be conditioned upon the end result of denuclearization. So that's what we're doing right now, consulting with our allies.
Just very quick follow-up.
You only got another hour now, okay?
Diplomacy, can you define what you mean? And former President Obama warned the incoming President Trump that North Korea was the top foreign policy issue that he was watching. Is that how you assess the crisis in North Korea?
Yes. Okay, hang on a second here. Kristen, Nancy, CBS.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to go back to voting rights. And as Yamiche mentioned, Republican legislatures across the country are working to pass bills that would restrict voting, particularly Democrats fear impacting minority voters and young voters, the very people who helped to get you elected in November. Are you worried that if you don't manage to pass voting rights legislation, that your party is going to lose seats and possibly lose control of the House and the Senate in 2022?
What I'm worried about is how un-American this whole initiative is. It's sick. It's sick. Deciding in some states that you cannot bring water to people standing in line, waiting to vote. Deciding that you're going to end voting at 5 o'clock when working people are just getting off work. Deciding that there will be no absentee ballots under the most rigid circumstances. It's all designed, and I'm going to spend my time doing 3 things. 1, trying to figure out how to pass the legislation passed by the House, number 1. Number 2, educating the American public. The Republican voters I know find this despicable. Republican voters, the folks outside this White House. I'm not talking about the elected officials. I'm talking about voters. And so I'm convinced that we'll be able to stop this because it is the most pernicious thing. This makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle. I mean, this is gigantic, what they're trying to do. And it cannot be sustained. And do everything in my power, along with my friends in the House and the Senate, to keep that from becoming the law.
Is there anything else you can do about it besides passing legislation?
The answer is yes, but I'm not going to lay out a strategy in front of the whole world and you now.
And then on a related note, have you decided whether you are going to run for re-election in 2024? You haven't set up a re-election campaign yet, as your predecessor had by this time.
My predecessor needed to. My predecessor. Oh, God, I miss him.
Have you?
No, the answer is yes. My plan is to run for re-election. That's my expectation.
And then on one other note, on bipartisanship, your old friend, Mitch McConnell, says you have only spoken to each other once since you took office, and that you have moved far left since taking office. Do you see it the same way he does? Have you rejected bipartisanship?
No, I haven't at all. I've been meeting. When's the last time a president invited the opposite party down at least a half a dozen times to talk about issues, everything from how we work. We're working with a group of 20 members of the Senate right now and House on how we reestablish our ability to make computer chips and how we get ahead of the game, how we can work together. We're working together on a bunch of things. But look, I know Mitch well. Mitch knows me well. I would expect Mitch to say exactly what he said. But this is a matter of making sure that I would like elected Republican support. But what I know I have now is I have electoral support from Republican voters. Republican voters agree with what I'm doing. And so unless Mitch says the last thing I did, this last piece of legislation is so far left, well, then he ought to take a look at his party. Over 50% of them must be over that edge as well, because they support what I did. Okay, where am I here? Let me see. Caitlin?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have a question for you, but first I'd like to follow up on a question from Yamiche, and that's on the filibuster.
That counts as a question, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll make it quick. It's a quick question.
You can.
Regarding the filibuster, at John Lewis's funeral, President Barack Obama said he believed the filibuster was a relic of the Jim Crow era. Do you agree?
Yes.
If not, why not abolish it if it's a relic of the Jim Crow era?
Successful electoral politics is the art of the possible. Let's figure out how we can get this done and move in the direction of significantly changing the abuse of even the filibuster rule first. It's been abused from the time it came into being by an extreme way in the last 20 years. Let's deal with the abuse first.
It sounds like you're moving closer to eliminating the filibuster. Is that correct?
I answered your question.
You also just made some news by saying that you are going to run for re-election.
I said that is my expectation.
So is that a yes, that you are running for re-election?
Look, I don't know where you guys come from, man. I've never been able to travel. I'm a great respecter of fate. I've never been able to plan 3.5 years ahead for certain.
And if you do run, will Vice President Harris be on your ticket?
I would fully expect that to be the case. She's doing a great job. She's a great partner. She's a great partner.
And do you believe you'll be running against former President Trump?
Oh, come on. I don't even think about it. I have no idea. I have no idea whether there'll be a Republican Party. Do you? I know you don't have to answer my question, but I mean, do you? I mean, look, this is the way I view things. I become a great respecter of fate in my life. I set a goal of that's in front of me to get things done for the people I care most about, which are hard-working, decent American people who really having it stuck to them. I want to change the paradigm. I want to change the paradigm. We start to reward work, not just wealth. I want to change the paradigm. If you notice, didn't you find it kind of interesting that my Republican friends were worried about that the cost and the taxes that had to be had, if there is any tax to be had as they talk about it, in dealing with the act that we just passed, which puts money in people's pockets, ordinary people? Do you hear them complain when they passed close to $2 trillion Trump tax cut, 83% going to the top 1%? Do you hear them talk about that at all? I love the fact that they found this whole idea of concern about the federal budget. It's kind of amazing. When the federal budget is saving people's lives, they don't think it's such a good idea. When the federal budget is feathering the nest of the wealthiest Americans, 90 of the Fortune 500 companies making billions of dollars not paying a cent in taxes, reducing taxes to the point that people who are making, if you're a husband and wife, a school teacher, and a cop, you're paying at a higher rate than the average person making $1 billion a year is. Something's wrong. Their newfound concern I'm concerned, look, I meant what I said when I ran, and a lot of you still think I'm wrong, and I respect that. So I'm running for 3 reasons. To restore the soul, dignity, honor, honesty, transparency to the American political system. 2, to rebuild the backbone of this country, the middle class, hardworking people and people struggling to get in the middle class. They built America, and unions built them. The 3rd reason I said I was running was to unite the country. And generically speaking, all of you said, no, you can't do that. Well, I've not been able to unite the Congress, but I've been uniting the country based on the polling data. We have to come together. We have to. So from my perspective, you know, it's, to me, it's about just, you know, getting out there, putting one foot in front of the other, and just trying to make things better for people. Just hard-working people. People get up every morning and just want to figure out how to put food on the table for their kids, be able to have a little bit of breathing room, being able to have, make sure that they go to bed not staring at the ceiling like my dad did, wondering whether, since he didn't have health insurance, what happens if mom gets sick or he got sick. These are basic things. Basic things. And I'm of the view that the vast majority of people, including registered Republicans by and large, share that same view, that same sense of what is, you know, what's appropriate. Justin Sink, Bloomberg.
Thanks, Mr. President. I wanted to ask about your relationship with China now that you've been in office for a couple months. There's obviously the meeting in Alaska that was a little theatrical, and there's the continued human rights abuses. So today, I'm wondering, are you more likely than you were when you came into office to maintain tariffs on China? Are you considering banning imports of forced labor products? And would you consider cutting off U.S. investment or Chinese access to international payment systems?
Well, look, they're each specifically legitimate questions, but they only touch a smidgen of what the relationship with China really is about. I've known Xi Jinping for a long time. Allegedly, by the time I left office as vice president, I had spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader had, because President Obama and the Chinese President Hu decided we should get to know one another, since it was inappropriate for the President of the United States to spend time with the Vice President of another country. But it was obvious he was going to become the new leader of China. So I spent hours upon hours with him alone with an interpreter, my interpreter and his, going into great detail. He's very, very straightforward. Doesn't have a Democratic with a small d bone in his body, but he's a smart guy. He's one of the guys like Putin who thinks that autocracy is the way to the future. Democracy can't function in an ever complex world. So when I was elected and he called to congratulate me, I think to the surprise of the China experts who were his people on the call as well as mine listening, we had a 2-hour conversation for 2 hours. And we made several things clear to one another. I made it clear to him again, what I've told him in person on several occasions, that we're not looking for confrontation, although we know there will be steep competition. 2, that we'll have strong competition, but we'll insist that China play by the international rules. Fair competition, fair practices, fair trade. Thirdly, in order to compete effectively, I indicated that we're going to deal with China effectively. And we're going to need 3 things to do that. I'm telling our people. First, we're going to invest in American workers and American science. I said that all through the campaign. I say it again, and I'm setting up my administration to be able to do that, which is that You know, back in the 60s, we used to invest a little over 2% of our entire GDP in pure research and investment in science. Today, it's 0.7%. I'm going to change that. We're going to change that. The future lies in who can, in fact, own the future as it relates to technology, quantum computing, a whole range of things, including the medical fields. And so, what I'm going to do is make sure we invest closer to 2%. One of the reasons why I've set up the PAB, the President's Board with Scientists and the like, again, is we're going to invest in medical research, cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, the things, industries of the future, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotech, and we're going to make real investments. China is out investing us by a long shot because their plan is to own that future. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to reestablish our alliances, and I've been very clear with them. It's not anti-Chinese, and we've talked about it. I want to make sure that, for example, later today, after this, as a matter of fact, shortly after this, which is fine, we've been going close to an hour. I'm happy go longer, but one of the things that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be speaking with 27 heads of state in Europe. And very shortly, I think within the next hour or so, I don't know the exact time. And earlier this month, and apparently it got the Chinese attention, that's not why I did it, I met with our allies and how we're going to hold China accountable in the region. Australia, India, Japan, and the United States, the so-called Quad. Because we have to have democracies working together. Before too long, I'm going to invite an alliance of democracies to come here to discuss the future. And so we're going to make it clear that in order to deal with these things, we are going to hold China accountable to follow the rules. To follow the rules. Whether it relates to the South China Sea or the North China Sea or the agreement made on Taiwan or a whole range of other things. And the third thing, and the thing that I admire about dealing with Xi is he understands, he makes no pretense about not understanding what I'm saying any more than I do him. I pointed out to him no leader can be sustained in his position or her position unless they represent the values of the country. And I said, Mr. President, as I've told you before, Americans value the notion of freedom. America values human rights. We don't always live up to our expectations, but there's a value system. We are founded on that principle. And as long as you and your country continues to so blatantly violate human rights, we are going to continue in an unrelenting way to call to the attention of the world and make it clear what's happening. And he understood that and made it clear that no American president, at least one did, but no American president ever backed down from speaking out of what's happening to the Uyghurs, what's happening in Hong Kong, what's happening in country. That's who we are. The moment a president walks away from that, as the last one did, is the moment we begin to lose our legitimacy around the world. It's who we are. So I see stiff competition with China. China has an overall goal, and I don't criticize them for the goal, but they have an overall goal to become the leading country in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and the most powerful country in the world. That's not going to happen on my watch, because the United States is going to continue to grow and expand.
All right, just to follow up on the meeting of democracies, is that where you expect in a multilateral way to make these decisions about sanctions or
No, that's not where I make the decision. That's where I make sure we're all on the same page. All on the same page. Look, I predict to you, your children or grandchildren are going to be doing their doctoral thesis on the issue of who succeeded, autocracy or democracy. Because that is what is at stake. not just with China. Look around the world. We're in the midst of a fourth industrial revolution of enormous consequence. Will there be middle class? How will people adjust to these significant changes in science and technology, the environment? How will they do that? And our democracy is equipped because all the people get to speak, to compete. It is clear, absolutely clear, and most of the scholars I dealt with at Penn agree with me around the country, that this is a battle between the utility of democracies in the 21st century and autocracies. If you notice, you don't have Russia talking about communism anymore. It's about an autocracy. Demand decisions made by a leader of a country. That's what's at stake here. We got to prove democracy works.
Mr. President, sorry, I know you haven't had a chance to address the tragedies in Georgia and Colorado. You had said to stay tuned for actions that you might take on gun control. Wondering if you've made a decision either about sending the manufacturer liability bill that you had promised on day one to Capitol Hill, or executive actions like going after ghost guns or giving money to cities and states to battle gun control.
All the above. It's a matter of timing. As you've all observed, successful presidents, better than me, have been successful in large part because they know how to time what they're doing, order it, decide in priorities what needs to be done. The next major initiative is, and I'll be announcing it Friday in Pittsburgh in detail, is to rebuild the infrastructure, both physical and technological infrastructure of this country, so that we can compete and create significant numbers of really good paying jobs. Really good paying jobs. And some of you have been around long enough to know that used to be a great Republican goal and initiative. I still think the majority of the American people don't like the fact that we are now ranked, 85th in the world in infrastructure. I mean, look, the future rests on whether or not we have the best airports that can accommodate air travel, ports that you can get in and out of quickly so businesses decide. Some of you, if you're ever local reporters and you found your governor or mayor trying to attract business to your community, what's the first thing the business asked? What's the closest access to an interstate highway? How far am I from a freight rail? Is the water available? Is enough water available for me to conduct my business? All the things that relate to infrastructure. We have somewhere, I asked the staff to write it down for me, and they did, not for this, but for a longer discussion. We have somewhere in terms of infrastructure, we rank 13th globally in infrastructure. China is investing 3 times more in infrastructure than the United States is. Bridges, more than 1/3 of our bridges, 231,000 of them, need repairs. Some are physical safety risks or preservation work. 1 in 5 miles of our highways and major roads are in poor condition. That's 186,000 miles of highway. Aviation, 20% of all flights weren't on time, resulting in 1.5 million hours lost in production. 6 to 10 million homes in America still have lead pipes servicing their water lines. We have over 100,000 wellheads that are not capped, leaking methane. What are we doing? And by the way, we can put as many pipe fitters and miners and us to work capping those wells at the same price that they would charge to dig those wells. So I just find it frustrating. Frustrating. Talk about, last point I'll make in the infrastructure, and I apologize for spending more time on it, but is that if you think about it, it's the place where we will be able to significantly increase American productivity, at the same time providing really good jobs for people. But we can't build back to what they used to be. We have to build, the environment's already, global warming's already done significant damage. The roads that used to be above the water level didn't have to worry about where the drainage ditch was. Now you got to rebuild them 3 feet higher because it's not going to go back to what it was before. Only get worse unless we stop it. There's so much we can do. Look at all the schools in America. Most of you live in the Washington area now, but in your hometowns, I don't know where you're all from. How many schools where the kids can't drink the water out of the fountain? How many schools are still in a position where there's asbestos? How many schools in America we're sending our kids to don't have adequate ventilation? How many homes, buildings, office complexes are wasting billions of barrels of oil over time because they can't hold in the heat or the air conditioning because it's leaks through the windows that are so porous in the connections? It's amazing. So there's so much we can do that's good stuff, makes people healthier, and creates good jobs. And I think that I got one more question here. And Janet.
Mr. President, we too have been reporting at the border, and just like Cecilia, we ran into a pair of siblings who came in on Monday, were detained by CBP, had the phone number for their mother who lives in the U.S. We have contacted the mother. That's the only way they know her kids are here, because CBP today, Thursday, has not contacted that mother. So when can we expect your promise of things getting better with contacting and expediting?
Well, they're already getting better, but they're going to get real. They're going to a whole hell of a lot better real quick, or we're going to hear some people leaving. Okay? We can get this done. We're going to get it done. I had a long meeting with the entire team and several cabinet-level officers the other night. We're going to be moving within the next week over 100,000. I mean, 1,000 people out of the Border Patrol into safe, secure beds and facilities. We're going to significantly ramp up. We're already out there contacting everyone from getting some of the employees at HHS. There's a lot of them doing other things and move them into making those calls. We're in the process of rearranging and providing for the personnel needed to get that done. But I admire the fact that you were down there, you're making the calls yourself. It's real. The next thing that has to happen, though, as you well know, has to happen. There have to be some certitude that this is actually mom, dad, or whomever. And there's ways to do that. There's ways to do that, a little bit like determining whether or not you got the right code for your credit card. What was your dog's name, kind of thing. I'm being a bit facetious, but not really. And also seeking harder data from DNA to birth certificates, which takes longer. So I want to do this as quickly, as humanly possible, and as safely as possible.
Well, no, treating the root causes in Latin America doesn't change things overnight. How do you realistically and physically keep these families from coming to the U.S. when things will not get better in their countries right away?
Well, I can't guarantee that, but I know, that old thing, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. You know as well as I do. You cover it. You have it's not like somebody sitting on a hand-hewn table in Guatemala, in somewhere in Mexico or in Guadalupe saying, I got a great idea. Let's sell everything we have. Give it to a coyote. Have them take our kids across the border into a desert where they don't speak the language. Won't that be fun? Let's go. That's not how it happens. People don't want to leave. When my great-grandfather got in a coffin ship in the Irish Sea, the expectation was he going to live long enough on that ship to get to the United States of America. But they left because of what the Brits had been doing. They were in real trouble. They didn't want to leave, but they had no choice. So I can't guarantee we're going to solve everything, but I can guarantee we can make everything better. We can make it better. We can change the lives of so many people. And the other thing I want to point out to you, and I hope you point out, I realize it's much more heart-wrenching, and it is, to deal with a 5 and 6 and 7-year-old. But you went down there and you saw the vast majority of these children, 70% are 16 years old, 17 years old, and mostly males. Doesn't make it good, bad, or indifferent, but the idea that we have tens of thousands of kids in these god-awful facilities that are really little babies crying all night, there's some, that's true. That's why we got to act. And yesterday, I asked my team, both the director of the two agencies as well as others, I asked them what would they in fact, and I asked their opinion because they're the experts, but I said, focus on the most vulnerable immediately. But there's no reason why in the next month as people cross the border, that phone call can't be made in the first 48 hours and begin.
If I may ask one last question, have you had any talks with Senate Republicans who are threatening this administration with not considering the immigration legislation that was passed in the House until the situation at the border has been resolved?
No, because I know they have to posture for a while. They sort of got to get out of their system. This is but I'm ready to work with any Republican who wants to help solve the problem or make the situation better. But folks, I'm going. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Today's event with a bold promise, doubling the number of coronavirus vaccine shots in 100 days. He bumped that goal up to 200 million shots. He answered questions about immigration, the filibuster, and Afghanistan, saying it would be hard to meet a May 1st deadline to pull troops. Repeated several times that he intends to, quote, solve problems, and said he expects to run for re-election. The entire event lasted just over an hour, and a number of NPR correspondents are here to analyze what we heard. Our national political correspondent Mara Liasson, White House correspondents Franco Ordonez and Aisha Roscoe, diplomatic correspondent Michelle Kellerman, and science reporter Selena Simmons-Duffin. Good to have you all with us.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Mara, I want to start with you. This sounded very different from the press conferences of the last 4 years. What stood out to you?
Yes, very different. What stood out? Just how well he did, actually. I mean, this wasn't the stumbling, bumbling Biden caricature. He didn't lose his train of thought. I didn't make a gaffe. The only false note he hit was at the very end when he said Republicans have to posture for a while to get it out of their system. That was slightly condescending, but he and said, I'm ready to work with any Republican who wants to make the situation better. Mm-hmm. That's more of the Biden way. But he made a lot of news.
Yeah.
First of all, he said that he didn't expect we'd be here. He said he certainly expects to run for president, and that he would keep Kamala Harris on the ticket, although he kept on saying that he's a big believer in what happened in 4 years. He did make a little bit of news on the filibuster. He repeated what he'd already said, that he believes in restoring the talking filibuster, making it harder, more painful, making people stand there till they collapse, he said.
Yeah.
But he said, if everything lockdown and chaos, then yes, he would maybe go further than that. He was pressed on it, but he didn't take the bait. And he talked in depth about the border. He seemed his command. And I would say, if he was waiting to do this because he had any concerns about it, he shouldn't have had any.
Amara, it struck me that on so many questions, from the filibuster to voting violence, he seemed to rely on his experience as a senator and talked so much about his confidence in how you get things done, especially when you've got just 50 Democrats plus the tie-breaking vote in the vice president. I mean, he said at one point, we're calculating how to get things done in the Senate. We're going to get a lot done. Yep. At another point, he said successful presidents are successful because they know how to time what they're doing. Such a reliance on his history as a senator.
Experience. He repeated over and over again that he wants to get things done. He's very pragmatic. He said he seemed to have certain touchstones for 3 reasons. He wanted to, restore the soul of America, help the people he cares about the most, who are working people, figure out how to make their lives better.
Yeah, he had that line about rewarding work, not wealth.
Yes, rewarding work, not wealth, and investing in America. He framed his infrastructure expected he would as a outcompete China program. He said in Pittsburgh on Friday he's going to be talking more about that. Pittsburgh's in the industrial heartland, pretty good place to do that.
In the room there in the White House, and so I want to give her an opportunity to jump in here quickly. Callum?
Yeah, Aisha, I mean, you're in the room where that just wrapped up, and the president had a lot to try to accomplish today. How did he do? What did he accomplish with this news conference, do you think?
Well, I think that he was able to put forward a strong defense of his administration's record at the border. He basically laid out the case that that even though there has been a surge at the border, he made the case that it was cyclical in nature. It wasn't because of him, and that his bottom line was that he wasn't going to engage in activity that he believed to be inhumane. So he seemed to be drawing this distinction that even if more people are coming, he is not going to leave children, and allow them to suffer. But he also faced questions about the conditions, and he said that it's not okay with him, and that there are going to be changes in the way children are being held. I am walking right now, so I may sound a little winded.
Aisha, but you're doing a great job. And I just want to follow up because the first question to the president was basically about his commitment to bipartisanship, making a note that he had wanted to reach across the aisle when I'm wondering whether Republicans will hear the message he gave today, which was basically, hey, look, the onus is on you to come to the table and work with me. Do you think that's an effective message for him?
Well, he seemed to be that the on his side, and that's the way they've been trying to redefine bipartisanship, by basically saying, it's not just that I need to reach out to the Republicans in office. I'm reaching out to the Republicans at home in the public, and that they support my policies, and that's what I'm concerned about. And so trying to make the case to the public and to the Republic that what he is doing is right. And so that's the way he seems to be framing it. I don't know if Republicans will necessarily buy that, but that's the way he's framing it.
I want to talk more about his answers about bipartisanship on getting things like infrastructure improvements done. Let's listen. And we may not have that cut there. But Mara, a lot of questions were asked about the filibuster. There was actually one question about it being a relic of the Jim Crow era. And the president had very strong words after pausing for for a second or so before answering this. Has he changed his agenda by getting rid of the filibuster so that Republicans can't block his legislation?
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because he had been asked a question about the filibuster where he was very clear. He said, return us to the talking filibuster. I'm willing to go further if it's all chaos and lockdown. And then when he was pressed on it, on voting rights, yeah, he did pause for a long time, but say in a very impassioned way, he said that he considered the efforts of state legislatures around the country to be, he said, it's sick. He said, it's sick that you can't bring water to somebody who's waiting in line to vote, to cut off voting at 5 p.m. when it's wrong to have no absentee voting. He said he has to figure out, one, how to pass the bill that's been passed by the House to basically it pushes back efforts in states around the country. But also he said he wants to educate the American people about these state laws. So it sounded like he wanted to make sure they didn't pass as he's trying to figure out how much to push for the House-passed voting rights legislation. He said at one point that the bills that are under consideration around the country make Jim Eagle. He said this is gigantic, and he's going to be, continuing to work to figure out ways to stop them.
Go back to something else that he talked quite a bit about, especially at the start of this news conference. And that was specifically about the ways that he's going to counter what's happening at the southern 5,000 beds at Fort Bliss in Texas immediately available to housing migrants, including children who are crossing the border without adults, as Aisha mentioned. Let's listen to a little bit of that.
Idea that which I would never do. If an unaccompanied child ends up at the border, we're just going to let them starve to death and stay on the other side. No previous administration of Trump. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it.
Franco, the president, as we heard, spoke pretty passionately about all of the ways he says former President Trump did border systems that can accommodate. What else did he say that jumped out to you?
Yeah, he was, as you could hear there, this was something that he really is grappling with the children, with the kids, and how asked by reporters about specific cases of children who came over and having the phone calls with the mothers who told them that they had sent this, very dangerous journey. You could hear in Biden's voice. At one point I felt like he was a bit gasping, listening to kind of anecdote of the mother telling their story. So on the one hand, you have the children that he's very concerned about. On the other hand, I was also hearing that he was also being longer in some of his migrants. He really gave some of his most forceful remarks, stating that his administration was negotiating with Mexico to send all of the other migrants to Mexico. And he said all of them should go back except for the children. So he was, again, kind of playing, sending two different messages. And they've had some challenges.
Kellerman to talk about some of the foreign policy issues that came up in this press conference, specifically Afghanistan, because President Trump had set this deadline of May 1st for all U.S. troops to be out of the country, and Biden pretty much said today.
Yeah, he said it's going to be hard to meet that May 1st deadline, but he also insisted we're not staying for long. He was asked specifically, do you see the possibility that they're next year? And he said, I cannot picture that being the case. But so remember, Ari, that this the Biden administration came into office with few actually agreed to with the Taliban. Biden kept the U.S. envoys Zalmay Khalilzad on the job, so there was some continuity. They've been saying that the Taliban hasn't met their end of the bargain, so that may be one reason why they're going to have to keep these troops in longer. But right now, they're at about 20.
This is an issue that Biden knows better than almost anyone. If I'm not mistaken, it was part of his portfolio as Barack Obama's vice president.
Right. And this is, and during the campaign, he talked about ending endless war mantras. He's obviously been involved with this one since the beginning. But the administration is kind of reviewing where things are. There are really no easy. The violence is still there. The peace talks haven't gotten underway, and they're basically trying just about anything. The Turks have offered to host a meeting in April. Talks. Blinken has been meeting with NATO allies to talk about the next steps. He's also made some suggestions in a leaked document to have kind of a transitional Afghanistan. So they seem to be trying everything they can diplomatically, and in the meantime, keeping probably a small footprint for the time being.
Selena Simmons-Duffin, the president started the news conference by boasting that his administration has blown past the goal to have 100 million shots by 100 days in office. In fact, he's 100 million shots. But he hasn't yet achieved the goal of opening a majority of K-8 schools in his first 100 days. Now, there is still time to get that done, but what did he say about the latest on?
Yeah, he said that they were close to getting to a majority of schools open, and he did clarify that when he says open, he means students in school 5 days a week. To NPR's Corey Turner, who covers education, about 42% of K-8 schools are open for in-person, but the challenge is that many families aren't sending their kids back. 33%. The administration has made some moves to try to make it possible for schools to open. Last week, the Biden administration announced that it will spend $10 billion on schools. The administration has also been encouraging states to prioritize teachers in vaccination so that it's safer for teachers to go back to in-person teaching. And then it was that the CDC students to be 3 feet apart in school instead of 6 feet apart, which could alleviate some of the space concerns that schools have. So all of these things are happening, and it seems like, hopefully will be able to deliver on the goal of opening the majority of schools for in-person learning, and they have 36 days to get that done.
Let's bring in Aisha Roscoe, who was in the East Room for this press conference. Aisha, maybe surprisingly, we talked quite a bit, the president at the beginning, about what we just heard regarding children and back to school and getting vaccinated. But maybe surprisingly, there weren't many questions about guns to you.
That was surprising. He did get a question right at the end about, whether he was going to move unilaterally on executive order and gun control. Seemed to say that yes, he's considering or he's made a decision on all of it, but then he went into a very long spiel about how everything has to have the right time in the moment. Seemed to say or imply that right now the moment is for infrastructure and it's not for gun control. That's what it seemed to be the implication, because that's instead of talking about specifically what he would do on gun control. And that was a very interesting thing, because everyone's been, and he seemed to very clearly say that the timing for right now is infrastructure.
Aisha, can you talk about, I was just going to ask, since you were there in the room and have been before, this looked very different on television. Can you tell us about what it felt like being there?
Yeah, it was very different. Most press conferences, even before, even before President Trump, even during the Obama administration, they're pretty crowded. Like, they're just people packed in like sardines next to each other. That was not the case. And this one was spread apart. Every seat was spread about 6 feet apart. There was lots of space. There was lots of distance between the president and the press. And
it looked like each person masked.
Yes, I mean it was very, it was very serious. Everyone obviously had on their mask. Some of them had on double mask, and so safety and the coronavirus look and a different feeling. And obviously it was very different from the former administration, where it was pretty much a free-for-all at the press conferences. So that was also different.
So much of what the Democrats on being able to get it through the Senate, where they have just 50 votes. So he was understandably asked a lot today about the filibuster, and I'd like to play tape of part of one of his answers. Let's listen to this.
In 1971, the filibuster existed. There were a total of 58 motions to break a filibuster. That whole time. There were 5 So it's being abused in a gigantic way. And for example, it used to be you had to stand there and talk and talk and talk and talk and guess what? People got tired of talking and tired of collapsing.
At one point, he said, I like the way it was when I joined the Senate about 120 years ago. So, Mara, the table, and it sounded like he was more or less endorsing one of them that doesn't go so far as to completely do away with the filibuster. But what do you think we can expect to see the White House throw its weight behind in the weeks ahead?
That's a really good question. I feel like he stole my joke about 120 years ago. I think that what he did today is move forward one. Up until now, he said, I'm open to going back to the talking filibuster, making it a little more painful to have a filibuster. You have to stand there until you collapse. And then he said people will get tired of collapsing. He said, first, he gave himself some praise. He said, I've never been considered poor at getting things done in the U.S. Senate. And he said, if we have to, if there's complete lock, if Republicans filibuster or obstruct every single thing I want to do, we're going to have to talk about going farther than just returning the talking filibuster. Now, the strategy for this is that if you are going to get 50 Democratic votes to overturn the filibuster, which means you have to convince Joe Manchin and a couple other centrist Democrats, the filibuster is tied to something extremely popular that these senators want. In other words, voters don't care about the filibuster, but they do care if there's a filibuster stopping something they really want.
Like ballot accessors.
Or whatever it might be. So Democrats say they need a kind of paper trail. They need to compile the evidence and point to, look, Republicans are stopping infrastructure with a filibuster. They're stopping voting, minimum wage hike, whatever it might be. And then if Joe Manchin cares more about the thing that they're stopping than the minority rights that the filibuster, he might be more willing to vote to overturn it. I think it's going to take some time. First, Republicans have to obstruct everything. That's what the president was saying. Bipartisanship. He was saying it's up to the Republicans. He said they have to determine if we're going to work together or if they're just going to decide to continue the politics of.
Just for some context here, people don't have to go back to 1917 for a time when 50 votes got things done in the Senate. You and I have both covered Washington during a recent period. To pass legislation was not the default. This is a very recent development, right?
Well, it's recent that it's become this widespread. I mean, first, they're not filibuster, right? Or there are many things that are passed by reconciliation and get more than 50 votes. What he's trying to do, and he was asked a lot about this today, if there are any areas in his Build Back agenda, which is his next big priority, where Republicans could come on board around competing with China on intellectual property. He's just feeling this out. He says he wants to work in a bipartisan way, but his bottom line, and he said this over and over again, is he wants to be practical and deliver.
Some stations are going to take a quick break right now. You are listening to special coverage from NPR News. You're listening to live special coverage from NPR News of President Biden's first White House press conference. I'm Ari Shapiro.
I'm Callum Borchers.
You know, one thing that stood out was the top of this press conference, where President Biden noted right off the top that immigration and gun control have been issues for very not going to be solved overnight. Let's listen.
That's right, 200 million shots in 100 days. I know it's ambitious, twice our original goal, but no other country in the world has even come close, not even close to what we are doing.
And that was the president talking about the vaccination coronavirus plan. So Duffin, can you talk a little bit more about the president's plan and his rollout that he was talking about?
Yeah, that's right. He told us last week the administration was going to hit 100 million shots on day 58 instead of day 100 of his administration. And he said that there would be a new goal, but he did not until today. So the new goal is 200 million shots in the first 100 days. So I've been sitting here doing some math. It seems that there are 114 million shots that have been given so far in the Biden administration. He has 86 million shots to go in about 36 days, which is about 2.5 million shots a day. That's reachable. I mean, that would be about 90 million shots. So, it's in the ballpark. The issue is shots that are available are being snapped up right now. Demand is incredibly high in most places. Pharmacies cannot keep people away vaccinated, but that demand might wane. And the second 100 million shots might be much more difficult than the first. And so I think that the pace of production, the supply of vaccine is definitely there. There are now 3 vaccines available. There are deals being made to help scale up manufacturing. It seems like the sign-up systems and all of the other challenges in the vaccine rollout have started to kind of get their footing, and the pace of vaccination is good. The question is, keep up, and will the people who are on the fence about vaccination be able to be talked into it? I think that that's where public health officials who are looking ahead to what the next challenges are their concerns are and where their focus is. It's hard in some ways for us to imagine that. I think a lot of us are watching and it just seems like demand is bottomless, but I don't think that there will be that point where it switches and suddenly there's more supply than there are people who want to get vaccinated.
This is really interesting because it's actually hard to imagine where you live, because in certain parts of the country, the rollout has been very smooth. We see there are some challenges, specifically on the distribution level, not necessarily on the reporting shown you.
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, right now, allocations are happening based on the size of the adult population in a given place. Of how that rollout looks and how it's going, it varies so much. It is such a patchwork system. In some places, you can go to Kroger's, or in some places that isn't how it works at all. And in some places, hospitals are taking a lead role, or mass vaccination sites. It is a complete patchwork. Thankfully, we are to try to have a tool online where you can look up your state and figure out how the vaccine rollout is going, and what the sign-up systems are where you live. But that has been a huge challenge, and the Biden administration to make it so that we don't have any details on how that's going to look and whether it's going to be possible. And it seems like, that the time is now to try to start to tell people, here's where to look if you want to get vaccinated, and you don't understand how to go about it where you live.
Aisha Roscoe, you were in the East Room for a couple of, I thought, interesting exchanges with the president and the press corps about his re-election plans in 2024. Now, that's more than 3 years away, but he did leave the door open. He said he plans to run for re-election. Didn't say for certain that he will.
He said it's his expectation, and he seemed to get a kick out of the question, although I can't imagine it was that surprising. But he, as he likes to say, if the creek don't rise, and that seemed to be what his position on this, that he was saying, that he expects to. And I don't think he could have, what else is he going, if he were to say that he didn't expect to, that would have been that would have overshadowed everything else in the press conference. Expected, it did add some levity to the moment.
Sure, but how does that play in his own party, though, Aisha? Because, I mean, there are some Democrats who may have embraced Joe Biden, but also might have hoped for a transitional figure, and he's already looking at a second term.
It's a difficult line to walk because there are those who obviously would be looking to be sort of who could basically hand it off to someone else, and I'm sure that those on the left would hope it would be someone very liberal. Obviously, you have of who people will be looking at, and so it's a difficult balance to be kind of looking to the next thing, but when Biden is already in the position.
We've just got a minute. This leaves his into this with gun violence, the coronavirus, the infrastructure package in the weeks ahead. So what are his next steps now?
I don't think that this changes. Still going to be focused on infrastructure next. The border is not going anywhere. I think he made about as forceful of a defense of what is happening as he could.
You're listening to special coverage of President Biden's first news conference. Thanks to our guests, Aisha Roscoe, White House correspondent, national political correspondent Mara Liasson, and Franco Ordonez, diplomatic correspondent Michelle Kellerman, and science reporter Selena Simmons-Duffin. I'm Tanya Mosley.
I'm Callum Borchers.
And I'm live special coverage from NPR News.